having for a few weeks, which is the way that you tell the story, Dean. It sounds as though this conflict that we are currently seeing the photographs of is relatively recent in human history. But often it is told as though it is ancient, visceral, and simply cannot exist in this, like as though the reality of Palestinian Jewish and Palestinian Israeli conflict just is true. And yet when I read your story, I think, well, okay, well, it's been true for this period of time, but not forever. Does that change then what we think is possible in our future?
Well, you know, if you look at Jewish communities in other places around the Middle East, there certainly was, after the creation of the State of Israel, and especially after the '67 war, an emigration of Jews from many of these Arab countries to Israel. But there still are Jewish communities. So, for example, there's a thriving Jewish community in Iran. And when I've talked about that, people say, oh, that's so terrible. How could you say that? Of course they're suffering. Well, no, I've actually been there. I've been to the kosher restaurants. I've been to the Jewish hospital in Iran. There is not this deep-seated Arab-Jewish or, you know, Muslim-Jewish animosity. There's not an anti-Semitism in the Middle East the way that there was in Europe, which is based on race, which is based on color, which is based on genes and biology. That doesn't exist in the Middle East. There's no history of that in the Middle East. So I don't think that in terms of interrelations in the Middle East, this is an unresolvable problem. But in terms of power dynamics, it may be. Because when the memory of the Holocaust was freshest, from 1948 to 1967, and when Israel was arguably its most democratic, it wasn't occupying the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and other places, there was barely any food aid coming from the United States to Israel. The United States decides to support Israel and embed the Israeli narrative in our narrative after 1967, when we see that Israel can become a so-called strategic asset, seize and hold Arab territory aligned in pro-Soviet states.
And this, it feels important to me to mark, because it actually, as horrible as it is, I somehow feel somewhat more optimistic if this is a problem rooted in 1967 and not in the beginning of time in some way.
We could step back. We could step back. We could allow the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, to adjudicate this. We could step back our military aid and let the parties.
And if we think it started in '67, it becomes more reasonable to imagine that different future. Thank you.